Hello, my name is William Johns, and I'm presenting this presentation with my colleague Daryl Martin. We attend the University of Advancing Technology under Professor Dr. David Bowman. It's August 17th, 2026, and this will be the statewide IXL K through 12 change plan. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to present this recommendation. Today's presentation is about a statewide K through 12 change plan for IXL learning, structured in a 24-month implementation strategy for review and approval by executive leadership and senior IT management. The purpose of this proposal is larger than the product adoption. It is about creating a repeatable, governable, and equitable statewide model for digital instructional support. In other words, the recommendation is not simply that the board buy a platform. The recommendation is that the board approve a controlled statewide transition in how student support, personalized practice, diagnostics, and reporting are delivered across districts. As we move through this presentation, two questions are being answered at the same time. First, what exactly is IXL learning, and why is it relevant to state educational system? Second, if the board were to move toward full K through 12 implementation, what would a disciplined and realistic change plan look like? The presentation is built for public sector audience, so it emphasizes risk management, equity, governance, implementation readiness, and measurable results. The goal is to present a model that is credible not only educationally, but organizationally. Executive case. Executive case can be summarized in 4 points. First, IXL is already a widely used, mature educational platform, which means the board is not being asked to take on the risk profile of an unproven tool. Second, our current district by district environment naturally produces inconsistency. Some districts have stronger resources, better local integration, or more mature instructional technology plans than others. That means student access to personalized support can vary based on geography and district capacity rather than instructional need. Third, a statewide implementation framework gives the state the ability to create common expectations for privacy, integration, training, support, and measurement. And fourth, a change plan based on Cotto's model provides a credible path for turning technology adoption into sustainable organizational change. It is also important to be clear about what leadership approval would mean. Approval would not mean flipping a switch statewide overnight. It would mean authorizing a structured 24-month rollout with governance up front, a representative pilot in the middle, and a discipline expansion model after early evidence is reviewed. This is significant because executive leaders in public institutions often face proposals that are overly optimistic about scale. This one is intentionally designed to avoid that. It acknowledges that statewide educational change is complex, political, and operationally demanding. That is why the proposal combines a proven platform with a cautious but forward-moving implementation framework. So what exactly is IXL learning? Before discussing implementation, it's important to define the product clearly. IXL Learning is a comprehensive K through 12 educational technology platform that combines digital curriculum, assessment, personalized guidance, and analytics in one system. It's not just a worksheet engine and not just a testing tool. Its value comes from the way those functions work together. Teachers and students can move from skill practice to insight, from insight to intervention, and from intervention to measurable progress within one ecosystem. That matters because many school systems today rely on disconnected tools that each solve one part of the problem, but create fragmentation across instruction, data, and workflow. IXL is designed to support standards-based learning across major subject areas. It offers content in math, language arts, science, social studies, and Spanish. In addition, it provides diagnostics and reporting tools that help educators understand where a student is performing, where gaps exist, and what the next instructional steps should be. For leadership, this integration is one of the strongest arguments in favor of adoption. When a platform supports both classroom use and decision-making use, It has much greater strategic value than a narrow instructional application. Another important point is that IXL is designed to be used across the full K-12 spectrum rather than for one narrow grade band. That allows a state board to think about long-term consistency, a product that can support elementary foundation skills, middle school progression, and high school reinforcement or remediation offers a different value proposition than one that fits only one part of the system. That statewide continuity becomes especially important when we talk about intervention, transitions between school levels, and equitable access across districts. IXL use cases in K through 12. This is important because it shifts the conversation from what IXL is to actually how it is used in schools. The first major use case is differentiated daily instruction. Teachers can assign work that aligns to current standards and performance levels, while students receive feedback and guidance that adjusts to their demonstrated needs. That makes IXL useful not only for remediation, but also for ongoing classroom differentiation. The second use case is diagnostic assessment. Schools can use IXL to understand where students are currently performing and to identify skill gaps that are not always visible through classroom observation alone. The third use case is progress monitoring. Once a student has been identified as needing support, teachers and leaders need to know whether that student is actually improving over time. IXL's reporting tools help make that visible. A fourth use case is intervention and reteaching. Teachers can use the platform's insight to assign more targeted work instead of relying on generic whole group repetition. The fifth use case is enrichment. Students who are ahead can work on appropriately challenging skills rather than waiting for peers to catch up. And finally, there's an administrative use case. School and district leaders can use analytics to identify patterns, monitor implementation, and understand where instructional support is most needed. That combination of classroom and leadership use cases is one reason IXL is a strong candidate for statewide planning. The change at hand. Now that the product has been defined, the next question is the change itself. The change is not just adopting IXL. The change is moving from a fragmented local adoption patterns to statewide government implementation model. In the current state, districts may have different tools, different training expectations, different privacy standards, and different levels of capacity to support teachers. Even when a district chooses a strong product, the state has limited visibility into how consistently it is being used or how well it is integrated into instructional improvement. The result is uneven access, inconsistent data, and variable implementation quality. The future state is different. Under the proposed model, the state establishes one implementation framework for IXL across K through 12. That includes common guidance for privacy, onboarding, technical integration, usage expectations, leadership reporting, and success measures. The practical effect is that access to personalized support becomes less dependent on district capacity and more aligned to student need. This is a meaningful strategic shift because it treats educational technology as part of statewide instructional infrastructure rather than as a collection of optional local purchases. Industry and culture. To understand whether this recommendation is viable, we have to understand the nature of the organization making the decision. A state school board is not a startup, not a private district network, and not a single campus. It is a public sector governing organization responsible for stewardship of public funds, educational outcomes, policy consistency, equity obligations, and public trust. That environment shapes how change must be proposed. A successful presentation cannot rely on novelty, excitement, or vendor enthusiasm. It has to demonstrate discipline, compliance, and long-range value. That culture creates strengths. It tends to create value, careful review, governance, documentation, and policy alignment. Those are real assets in a statewide implementation. But the same culture can also create drag. If ownership is unclear, decisions can stall. If risk tolerance is too low, pilots can become endless. If change is presented in vague or transformational language without operational specificity, leadership will rightly hesitate. So the implementation model has to match the organization's public sector DNA. That is why this proposal is built around control, stage adoption, and measurable accountability. Strengths and weaknesses. A credible change plan starts with an honest assessment of institutional strengths and weaknesses. The strengths are substantial. The state board has purchasing leverage, local authority, and the ability to create consistent standards for interoperability, privacy, and reporting. It also has executive legitimacy. When a state board prioritizes a system-wide initiative, it can align district expectations in a way that local efforts alone cannot. These strengths matter because statewide implementation will fail if the state behaves like a passive observer rather than a coordinating authority. The weaknesses are just as important to acknowledge. District readiness is uneven, both technically and operationally. Some districts can absorb new platforms quickly, while others need significant support. Initiative fatigue is also real. Educators and school leaders are often asked to absorb new tools on top of existing demands. In addition, some districts may see statewide implementation as a threat to local autonomy or as an implied criticism of current practice. Finally, the board must guard against underfunding implementation support. Buying licenses without sufficiently funding training, integration, and coaching is one of the most common reasons large education technology initiatives underperform. How strength neutralizes weaknesses. This is where strategic planning becomes practical. Our strengths can be used directly against our weaknesses. For example, state-level governance can reduce fragmentation by creating one statewide contract model, one privacy expectation set, one onboarding process, and one reporting architecture. That lowers the burden on districts, particularly those without deep technical or administrative capacity. Similarly, statewide scale can be used to pool resources, allowing high-need or lower-capacity districts to receive centralized implementation support that they would not be able to generate on their own. Executive sponsorship can also reduce initiative fatigue when the initiative is framed correctly. If IXL is introduced as one more disconnected platform, resistance will grow. But if positioned as a unifying instructional support system connected to intervention, MTSS, student growth, and consistent access, then it can replace fragmentation rather than add to it. In that sense, our strengths are not abstract. They are operational tools. The role of leadership is to use those strengths intentionally rather than assume the adoption will organize itself. The stakeholders affected. This proposed change affects nearly every level of the K through 12 system, and that's important because the more stakeholders are affected, the more carefully the implementation must be planned. Students are the most visible stakeholders. They are the direct beneficiaries of more consistent personalized practice, intervention, and enrichment. Teachers are perhaps the most operationally important stakeholders because their day-to-day workflow determines whether the platform actually produces instructional value. School leaders also matter because they are the ones who create schedules, monitor usage, coach staff, and manage competing school priorities. District leaders and the board itself also have major roles. District offices will need to manage local coordination, technical readiness, and communication. State board executives and IT leadership will need to govern privacy, interoperability, procurement, reporting, and overall rollout discipline. Families are also affected, especially when student data and home learning expectations come into the picture. The broader point is that the proposal should never be framed as a tool adoption targeted only at classroom teachers. It is a system-wide change touching instruction, operations, leadership, and public trust. Pushback we should expect. All major organizational changes encounter resistance, and successful proposals anticipate it instead of reacting to it. In this case, we should expect organizational pushback first. Some educators and administrators will question whether schools have enough bandwidth for another major initiative. That concern is rational and should be treated seriously. Regulatory pushback will also emerge. Board members, legal teams, or district leaders may ask how the initiative aligns with FERPA, accessibility obligations, procurement rules, and vendor accountability expectations. Those are not obstacles to avoid. They are issues to solve visibly and early. There's also an emotional resistance, which is often underestimated. Teachers may worry that analytics could be used to judge them rather than support them. Districts may worry about losing autonomy. Some school leaders may fear that they are being asked to own another accountability measure without enough support. A strong change plan addresses all three dimensions: organizational, regulatory, and emotional. That is why communication, barrier removal, and coalition building are central parts of this proposal rather than secondary details. Christensen and Wharton implications. This proposal needs a strategic lens, and that is exactly where Christensen and Wharton thinking are helpful. From a Christensen perspective, organizations often struggle not because they lack access to innovation, but because their structure and incentives favor familiar processes. In public education, that often means caution, long review cycles, and incrementalism. From a Wharton perspective, established institutions are vulnerable to traps such as waiting too long to engage, committing too cautiously, or failing to scale after early success. These traps are especially relevant in statewide educational systems where leadership must balance risk control with action. In this scenario, the board is strong in stewardship but vulnerable to overanalysis and slow commitment. That does not mean the board is resistant to improvement. It means the board must be given a model that preserves control while still producing forward motion. That is exactly what the Cotter-based framework does. It allows leadership to move deliberately but not indefinitely. It turns caution into disciplined implementation instead of passive delay. The 12 to 24-month rollout logic. Rollout logic is intentionally phased. In the first 3 months, the focus is not on classroom scale-up, it is on governance. That includes executive sponsorship, privacy and legal posture, pilot selection, vendor coordination, success metrics, and budget structure. This phase is essential because weak governance at the beginning usually creates operational confusion later. In months 4 through 8, the state runs a representative pilot. That pilot should include districts with varying levels of capacity such that the implementation model is tested under realistic conditions, not just ideal ones. In months 9 through 16, expansion happens in cohorts. The key principle is that expansion is earned through evidence, not assumed. District or cohorts move forward when readiness and performance gates are met. Finally, in months 17 through 24, the goal is institutionalization. This is when the platform becomes part of the standard practice through leadership dashboards, MTSS integration, professional development cycles, and routine review. The timeline is long enough to be realistic and short enough to create urgency. Urgency around fragmentation. And this means the urgency argument should be grounded in operational and equity realities. Fragmented adoption means unequal student access to personalized support. It means duplication in procurement and government's work. It means leaders struggle to compare implementation quality or student support patterns across districts. Most importantly, it means the state tolerates inconsistency in areas where consistency should matter. That is the urgency. The point is not that the state must act because everyone else is adopting technology. The point is that the delay allows fragmentation to continue. In public sector leadership, urgency has to be ethical and strategic, not emotional. Here, the urgency is that the current model allows support quality to vary based on district capacity. That is not ideal from an equity standpoint and not efficient from an operational standpoint. That is why urgency can be communicated credibly to executives. Coalition building that can remove barriers. In this case, the coalition must genuinely be cross-functional. IT cannot lead this alone, and curriculum cannot lead it alone. The coalition should include executive IT leadership, curriculum and assessment leaders, privacy and legal stakeholders, procurement, finance, district IT representation, principals, and teacher champions. The coalition matters because the barriers to success are cross-functional. Privacy issues, training issues, instructional alignment issues, and technical integration issues all need ownership. The important point here is that the coalition membership must come with responsibility. This is not a review committee, it is a working coalition. Each member or subgroup should own a defined work stream, timeline, and deliverable. That structure helps the board avoid one of the most common implementation failures, which is having many stakeholders in the room, but no one with real accountability for removing obstacles. Vision which resolves local anxiety. This must be specific enough to answer stakeholders' anxiety. If the vision is only statewide implementation of IXL, many people will hear a mandate rather than an improvement strategy. The better framing is this: every student in the state deserves access to a consistent, personalized support platform. Every teacher deserves clearer visibility into student needs, and every district deserves a common implementation model that reduces local burden. That vision directly answers concerns about equity, workload, and fragmentation. It is also important that the vision connect to classroom reality. Teachers and principals need to see how this helps intervention, progress monitoring, and instructional planning. District leaders need to see how it reduces duplication and creates clarity. Executives need to see how it aligns investment with measurable outcomes. A strong vision does not stay abstract. It translates statewide intent into local meaning. Communication for each point of resistance. Communication is one of the most underestimated parts of large-scale implementation. Different stakeholder groups hear the same initiative differently, so the message has to be adapted. Executives need to hear about governance, outcomes, budget discipline, and strategic risk. Principals need clarity about implementation responsibilities, staff support, and the routines that will change at the building level. Teachers need reassurance that the platform supports professional judgment rather than replacing it. Families need to understand both the benefits to students and the safeguards around student data. Another key communication principle is repetition. One message delivered once is not a communication strategy. The state will need repeated and specific messaging throughout the rollout. That includes initial framing, pilot updates, implementation guidance, and evidence reports. Effective communication is what turns a plan on paper into a shared understanding across the system. Empowering action, removing predictable obstacles. This requires leadership to remove the obstacles that schools can already predict. On the technical side, obstacles include weak signal sign-on, poor rostering, and inconsistent integration support. On the operational side, the obstacles are lack of training time, unclear usage expectations, and insufficient principal guidance. On the policy side, the barriers include unclear privacy rules, accessibility uncertainty, and inconsistent contract conditions. These issues cannot be left for districts to solve independently if the state wants consistent implementation. What empowerment means here is that leadership does not just ask schools to adopt, it clears a path for adoption. The state provides templates, playbooks, training structures, support channels, and guidance that reduces friction. When that happens, schools spend less time solving preventable administrative problems and more time using the platforms to support students. Quick wins must prove execution. Quick wins are essential, but they need to be defined carefully. In this proposal, quick wins are not marketing wins. They are operational proof points. By month 6 to 8, the state should expect high teacher training completion in pilot sites, strong login and rostering stability, and visible classroom usage routines with actual use of leadership dashboards in review meetings. These are the early indicators that the implementation model is functioning. This matters because public institutions often scale too quickly after promising early impressions. The better approach is to treat quick wins as evidence that the organization is capable of implementing with discipline. Once those indicators are visible, leadership has a stronger basis for scaling. Until then, the correct response is to keep strengthening the model. Using wins driving scale discipline. In this case, this means tying the expansion directly to evidence. Cohorts should move forward only when specified conditions are met, such as training completion, weekly active use, reliable support response, and stable data quality. This is an important safeguard. Without gates, the organization may scale enthusiasm instead of scaling readiness. Scale discipline is especially important in statewide systems because weak practices become expensive very quickly when multiplied. By using wins to set standards rather than merely to celebrate progress, the board reinforces the idea that implementation quality matters as much as product selection. That is a leadership message worth emphasizing. Embedding change to normal state practice. This is the difference between implementation and an initiative and implementation as normal practice. For IXL to become sustainable, it has to be built into the systems schools already use, such as MTSS processes, intervention planning, and instructional team meetings, district review cycles, and annual professional development. It also has to become part of administrative routine through onboarding, privacy reviews, retraining, and renewal analysis. Embedding the change means it no longer depends on enthusiasm from a few daily champions. It becomes part of the ordinary way the state supports learning. That is the point at which the board can say that technology has truly been implemented rather than simply adopted. Measures of success. Success has to be defined in ways that executives, technologists, and educators can all understand. On the implementation side, important measures include teacher training completion, weekly active usage, and reliability of access and rostering. On the instructional side, measures include diagnostic completion, targeted intervention usage, and signs of student growth in priority populations. On the governance side, measures include budget adherence, consistency of district reporting, and the absence of material privacy failures. These measures matter because they answer three separate questions. Is the platform being used? Is it supporting instructional improvement? And is it being governed responsibly? A successful statewide implementation must answer yes to all three. One without the others is not enough. Budget framework. This is about framing spending responsibly. The budget should be structured around categories: licensing, implementation services, professional development, integration and onboarding support, and contingency funding for districts needing additional help. That structure matters because the major risk in statewide educational technology is not only overspending, it is misallocating spending. Systems often fund licenses but underfunded implementation, which creates disappointment and weak adoption. A stage-gated funding approach is therefore the most credible option. Funds can be released in alignment with milestones and evidence, allowing leadership to maintain fiscal discipline while still supporting the rollout properly. This is the financial equivalent of the broader proposal: deliberate, measurable, and scalable. A recommendation to improve. The recommendation to leadership is to approve a 24-month statewide IXL rollout built around governance, a representative pilot, cohort-based expansion, and centralized support for privacy, training, and readiness. This is the right recommendation because it connects a proven platform to disciplined implementation model. It does not ask the board to choose between ambition and caution. It combines both. The proposal is ambitious in its statewide scope, but cautious in its execution design. The most important takeaway for the board is that this is not a technology purchase recommendation alone. It is a structured change strategy. It is designed to help the board move from fragmented and uneven support conditions to a more coherent, equitable, and measurable statewide model. That is the reason this proposal deserves attention and approval. APA references. This is references that support this proposal. They include official IXL materials describing the platform's curriculum, diagnostics, analytics, and implementation approach, along with broader sources on educational technology governance, privacy, and organizational change. This is to reinforce the proposal is grounded in both product evidence and change management thinking. This is the right place to reinforce credibility. The recommendations presented today is not based on intuition alone. It reflects the combination of platform capabilities, public sector organizational realities, and a structured implementation framework. This combines what makes proposals to be suitable for executive consideration. Thank you very much for hearing this proposal out. On behalf of William Johns and Daryl Martin at UAT under Professor David Bowman, thank you very much.